Hello everyone and welcome to this video on project business cases. We just want to be clear right from the start of this video that what we're looking at is a business case specifically within the project lifecycle. So a business case or a justification for a project. This isn't, as you'll commonly hear the phrase business case, as it relates to a particular business model or a particular product or line of products or services. This isn't relating to business as usual business cases or operational business cases. This is specifically for business cases within the project lifecycle. So a justification for a particular project rather than anything else. We are going to look at three distinct things. So first we're going to establish what a business case is exactly for a project, and look at a few of the ways it fits into the project lifecycle. Then we're going to look at the underlying purpose of a business case, or the three major things that it tries to achieve. And then lastly, we're just going to go through a list of the key elements of a business case and just briefly examine each one. So if we start with the question of what is a project business case, well, really it's a thing which helps us define the project itself. So it should contain the reasons for the project. So what problem is the project trying to solve, or what kind of change is the project designed to bring about? Justification for the immediate need for the project as well as an analysis of the expected business benefits, as well as the disbenefits, the costs and the risks, an explanation of how it can really be implemented. So the best way to think about this is not just as a one-off document, but a live document which is maintained throughout the entirety of the project lifecycle. So while it does provide the move from the first of the four-stage D model, so in the define stage, the very first stage of the project lifecycle, you want to gather the requirements, explore or kind of gather information on exactly what the problem is, exactly what kind of underlying issues the project's aimed at trying to resolve, establishing the scope of the project and so on. So to move from that onto the second of the four-stage model, the 4Ds model, the design stage, where you start undertaking detailed planning, well, you need to have got agreement from everyone involved as to a particular shape for the project, and that's what the project business case is aimed at achieving. So it's the move from the define stage onto the design stage, so from the first stage onto the second stage of the project lifecycle. So that's the immediate role of the business case, but as well as this, it's a live document. It's something that should be constantly updated. It drives the decision-making process, not in the early stages of the project lifecycle, but also throughout the entire lifecycle. So if you have a project business case which presents a justification for your project, which explains what the business benefits are, what the costs and the risks are, and then is used to approve the project, well then perhaps later on during the actual execution of the project, something changes. Maybe the market changes, maybe something within the environment changes, and your risks and the disbenefits and the costs now actually outweigh the positive benefits. Well, if you're keeping your business case live, so you're treating it like a live document, it's kept constantly updated, you'll be able to identify at what point actually the justification for that project vanishes, and it'd be better off to either cancel the project or roll it back or amend the scope. So it's not just something to approve a project or get a project greenlit. It's also there as a live document which should be continually updated. So if we look at how it fits into the actual management of a project and the internal parties involved, we can identify three distinct parties that have a direct input or interest in the business case. So you have the project sponsor. So you'll see this named in different ways in different project management methodologies, but sponsors used in Prince2 and the APM quite commonly. So this is someone within the management of the organization, so typically senior management, who owns a business case. This doesn't mean that they write the business case, but it's their project, it's their business case, as well as the benefits review plan. So someone within the organization that has the authority or the ability to secure funding, that has a senior view of the overall organizational or corporate strategy, and therefore can make sure the project is aligned. So if you're thinking about a marketing project, it may well be a senior marketing manager or a marketing executive who's a project sponsor. So not someone who's a project manager who's dealing with the day-to-day, but rather the person who's sponsoring the project, who has authority within the organization to really protect the project's interests. So that would be the project sponsor. So they would own the business case. They wouldn't necessarily write it, but they're ultimately responsible for the business case, while the person who's preparing and writing the business case would typically be the project manager. So the project manager is the person who's managing the day-to-day reality of the project. They're the person who prepares the business case. They're the person who would be responsible for preparing the various plans in the second stage of the project lifecycle. So the risk management plan, the scheduling plan, the resource management plan, the quality plan. So they would be the day-to-day person responsible for the project, and they would prepare the business case. And lastly, you would have the actual users themselves, so the people who are actually going to take the project deliverable and directly use it. So your user may be internal. So if you're running a project to, say, implement a new IT system or a new computer system for your employees, well, then the employees that are going to use the new system would be your users. Or it may be an external user. So if you're running a project to actually deliver something for an external client, for a group of users in a different company, or even a group of consumers, then they would be your users. So they would need to communicate their requirements and the desired benefits. So what they actually want from the project needs to go into the business case as well to justify the project being launched. So that's our understanding of what a business case is exactly. It's there to justify a particular project. It gathers together information and makes our initial evaluation or estimates of risks and costs and so on. And it presents the project sponsor with a definite justification to launch this project and to acquire the resources that are needed for it. Now, if you look at the three major purposes or the three major things that a business case has to achieve in order to be a successful business case, this is going to start breaking down the business case into separate areas and help us understand how we would prepare a project business case to get a project approved or to get the required go-ahead to start the detailed planning. So the first would be the strategic context. This is what we need to establish in the business case. So what is the underlying business need for this project? What's the rationale if you're trying to introduce some kind of change? What's your rationale for the change? So we're presuming that the business as usual, the operational activities within the organization are running as usual, and the project is trying to change something, introduce something new, change something in the internal environment, or indeed change something in the external environment. So we need to really justify our underlying need to actually introduce some change. Change for the sake of change is never good. There should always be a clearly thought out reason for actually introducing some kind of change within an organization. What the immediate trigger is for the change, because that may really affect how we carry out the project. Is it something which is a deeply pressing need, so we need to move as quickly as possible? Is it something which is preparing for a future problem, so we can slow down our rush to execute and instead focus on quality? So we need to put that into context in order to make these decisions for the project. Identify the objectives we're trying to achieve. So what's our measurable objective? So ideally SMART objectives would be identified, and they should fit with the organization's broader strategic objectives. So if your organization is trying to move in a particular direction, your project shouldn't be pulling in the opposite direction. It should be fitting in and coherent and cohesive with the organization's broader objectives. The next thing that we would need to achieve to kind of achieve the purpose of a successful business case, or to have our business case succeed, is a required amount of analysis and recommendations. So once we've established the underlying problems, what are our different options to address these underlying problems or the need to change? And what we need to do, even if we think, well, we don't have different options, we just have one option, so we don't need to justify choosing that option, well, you're always going to have at least two. So one option may be the option that you think is the obvious one to fix the problem, but you always have the option of doing nothing. So you can't really evaluate whether your option is the correct one, even if you think there's no alternatives, because you always have the alternative of just not doing the project, of just carrying on with your operation, carrying on with the business as usual without making changes. So you need at least to address these two different options, one to actually address the problem in a way that you think fit, and the other one of just not running the project. That's the only way to truly evaluate whether the project is worth doing. Now, as well as this, you may have additional options. So if you're looking to implement a new communication system, for example, within an organization, you've got the options of, say, using Microsoft Teams, maybe using Slack, maybe using a different collaboration platform. So you may want to take, say, 2 or 3 major solutions and compare them as different options to solve the problem, as well as looking at the option of just doing nothing and carrying on as you're currently carrying on. That will help you identify the costs, benefits and disbenefits of each of your options, and then you can focus in on a single recommended option. So this is the option that you actually want to do your detailed planning for if the project actually gets approved. Now, as well as that kind of process, we also want to bring in tools to help strengthen our recommendation. Remember, you're arguing for a particular project to be approved in a project business case, so you need to justify this and really make it convincing in order to get the green light to start your project, in order to get the resources that you may need to carry out your project. So you've got a few different ways you could achieve this, and this depends on the kind of project you're running. So you could choose to use financial evaluation tools. So we have net present value to identify the value of the activities involved, as well as the internal rate of return. So you could argue that actually this project will return X amount of revenue, or it will save X amount of expenditure. So you can evaluate that against the financial cost of the project. If it's not a project which lends itself to easy financial quantification, you can have technical evaluation. It will save X amount of time. It will make people's jobs X amount easier. So you can have a technical evaluation of the technical merits as well. A simple checklist evaluation model could be used. So this is just creating a list of requirements from your stakeholders, so from your users typically, and then saying, well, the project actually meets each of these requirements. So each of these individual requirements from the users will be achieved. So therefore, this is why we're recommending this project. We also have the weighted scorecard model, which is in some way similar to the simple checklist evaluation model, but it actually assigns different weights to different requirements. So it's maybe very useful for where there's a complex choice or there's multiple different technical solutions. So we want to recognize that certain requirements are more important than other requirements, and then we can use a weighted scorecard to really recommend one particular option. There is a separate video on weighted scorecards that I would strongly recommend you guys watch. It is another pre-recorded lecture video for this topic. So as well as this, the third thing that we want our business case to achieve would be looking at the management and the capacity, the organizational capacity that the project is working within. So how will your project fit within the organization's broader structure and governance system? So who's going to be responsible? Is there going to be a project board? How is it going to be overseen? How is it going to be reviewed? So all of the administrative necessities of running a project, including things which are quite important. So how are you going to measure the performance of your project? So how will you measure the benefits? How will you measure the success? How will you know if the objectives that you've identified are achieved. So we need some practical elements in here to identify performance measurement, as well as looking at business risks as well. How will your project risk management approach fit within the wider organizational risk management, for example? So that's looked at the three overlapping purposes of a business case, and what we're going to do now is to take a look at some of the distinct elements of a business case. So these are the things that usually must be present for a business case to be complete, and therefore for you to submit your business case for approval and to get the go-ahead to actually run your project. So we have 9 distinct elements in here, so if we would just run through them one by one. So firstly, the major element that really has to be present, without which you can't really consider a business case for a project, is the actual reasons that you want to run the project or the underlying problem that you're trying to solve. So this should be set out very clearly. You want to have a clear problem statement which expresses exactly what problem the project is designed to solve, or the underlying reasons, of which there may be more than one. And that has to be convincing. It has to be clear, logical, and lays out the reason why we need to consider some kind of response to this problem, or some kind of reason to actually do something outside of business as usual, outside of the normal operation, which is very much what a project is. So once you have your underlying problem or your underlying reason, you need to identify who are the different stakeholders in your project. So who's your project going to affect? That may be more than just one person. So obviously we can identify our users, but we also need to consider other stakeholders as well. So if you consider, let's say, looking at a particular, let's say, repainting a room in the university, we can consider as a project. Well, the obvious stakeholders here are going to be the students. So if it's a teaching room on campus, the students that are taught in that room are stakeholders to that project. They're the users, in fact. So we need to obviously consider their requirements. So what they need in a classroom when we're considering a project to renovate or repaint or to refit a particular lecture theatre or classroom. As well as this, so we have other stakeholders. You have the teaching faculty, so the actual lecturers that are going to teach there, and they may have different requirements. They may have different requests for the refit. But as well as the teaching staff, then you have, let's say, the janitorial staff who need to actually clean and maintain the classroom. The IT staff will be stakeholders if there's IT equipment such as a projector or computers in there as well. And then you have, let's say, the facilities management, or the people who actually manage the entire campus for that particular classroom or lecture theatre. So stakeholders can be quite broad. So we need to really identify all of the stakeholders involved, and in order to get all of their requirements. One group of stakeholders may have a particular set of requirements, and it may actually conflict with a different set of stakeholders. So we need to identify all of the stakeholders who will be affected and what they would want to see from a solution. So we're not really just going straight on to our solution. We've identified the problem, but we want to consider all of the stakeholders and what their requirements may be before we start just rushing to identify a particular solution to our problem. Once we have our stakeholders and our requirements, we can move on to the project scope statement. So if we look at the stakeholders and what they need, and we obviously have our underlying problem, then we'll be able to set the scope for the project, typically expressed in a single statement. So for our example of refitting the room, it may be the project scope statement may be this project is aimed at renovating room, A31 or A305. It will include refitting electrical equipment. It will involve repainting the walls and redoing the flooring. So you see how you capture the scope of the project in a single statement, a single sentence. And that's something which really comes into play when it comes to doing your work breakdown structure later. Everything in your project should fit within your project scope statement. You don't want to be doing anything outside of the scope statement. So if your project scope statement is this, project is aimed at renovating room 305, A305, it's not going to include activities which will involve in, A304 or A306. Those are outside the scope of the project. Once we have our project scope, we can start exploring different business options. So it could be, well, are we going to paint the room or a particular color, or are we going to go for wallpaper? Are we going to have a tiled floor, or is that too risky? We're going to go instead for carpet. So you're looking at the different options to actually pursue when it comes to the project itself. This is where your Wade scorecard model would come in, or your financial evaluation, your IRR or MPV would come in, or your technical evaluation, and that should produce a recommended option. And then for the rest of the business case, we're going to be justifying and arguing for our recommended option to actually solve the problem. We want to evaluate the benefits and disbenefits of our particular option as well. And here we have usually a bit of confusion around the language. So benefits and disbenefits are very particular things. They are not objectives, they're not risks. They have to be expressed in a particular manner. So benefits are not objectives. So the benefit of our room painting project or renovating project is not that there will be new flooring in room A305. It's not that the walls will now be a pleasant shade of blue. The benefit is a more positive teaching environment. So the benefit is not just having something done for the sake of it. It's identifying what's the benefit in having this done, what's the positive outcome or the positive change that's going to result as a consequence of doing these actions involved in the project. So if you're repainting the walls of a room, the benefit isn't having them repainted. The benefit is maybe it protects the walls, maybe it reduces the chance of damp, maybe it produces a brighter, more positive atmosphere within the classroom, maybe it encourages a learning environment because the room isn't visibly old or unmaintained. Those are the benefits of a successful project. The same thing would apply to disbenefits. So we have to be careful because sometimes the instinct is to look at risks. So what if this project doesn't go well, what's going to happen? That's your risk. Those are not your disbenefits. Your disbenefits are the negative outcomes of a successful project. So if you think about the disbenefits of our renovation project, well, it's going to be, while we're carrying out the work to renovate room A305, no one's going to be able to use it for 3 weeks. And instead, we're going to have to find rooms for those classes in other parts of the campus. So you see, that's not actually a risk. That's not a project gone wrong. It's an expected negative outcome from a successful project. Right, so as well as your benefits and your disbenefits of your recommended option or your recommended solution, you also want to identify what your expected resources are. So the next three very much go together. You would identify whether your project is going to take 5 employees or maybe 3 employees. If it's going to take any other units of resource that you have within your organization. Certain projects will need 15 laptops or 5 laptops or need a certain amount of computing power. Maybe they'll need to requisition certain resources internally. Those should all be identified in the business case as well, to really identify exactly the resources that would need to be dedicated to your project in order to make it a success, if it is going to be approved and the business case accepted. In a very similar vein, you want to identify your estimated timescale as well, so how long you expect the project to be going on for, as well as your estimated costs. And those are pretty straightforward. It can be very difficult at this stage because you haven't started your detailed planning to have an exact resource management plan or to have an exact scheduling plan or even an exact budget. So at this stage, it's still very, very preliminary. It's just the initial estimated resources, timescales and costs. And in a similar vein, You also typically have your preliminary risk assessment. So again, once you move on to the design phase of the project, so the second stage of the project lifecycle, you would have far more in-depth planning, and you'd have a full risk management plan as well with a full risk assessment done. But for the business case, we just need to understand the rough idea of the kind of risks that the project has in order for us to approve or reject the business case.